The NBA has been shaken to its core, and right now, all eyes are locked on the Minnesota Timberwolves and their 22-year-old superstar, Anthony Edwards, because whispers are turning into warning signs. If this organization doesn't move smart, fast, and fearless, the face of the franchise could be next to demand out.
I don't know how he can be all good. I'm not saying this particular move is something he should have a problem with. But I think the Minnesota Timberwolves better be careful. Because if they don't make the right moves, Anthony Edwards may ask out of there. I think that's something that they have to be mindful of because, if you're him, you certainly are, it's hurting watching others, get the shine that your talent deserves because the brother's all world, make no mistake, and he is box office. So it is a problem that Minnesota is going to have to fix. Now, and the guy, Julius Randle, that they let go, Julius Randle really has to take this opportunity to look in the mirror. He's averaged at least 20 points a game over 5 of the last 6 seasons. Okay, he's a 3-time All-Star, 2-time All-NBA player. He is not a scrub and had a damn good, decent, really good regular season, actually averaging 25 and 5. Not too many players was doing that. We get that part. But then folded like a cheap 10 against the San Antonio Spurs. We all know that. And I'm with you, Big Perk. Him, his family, he's class personified, a really good guy, the whole bit. But this is the second time a cap move. Brunson and those boys didn't think they could win with Julius Randle because Julius Randle, one could argue, has that Jaylen Brown syndrome of wanting to be that number one guy. It's just that Jaylen Brown deserves it, and Julius Randle may not. But nevertheless, that's what Julius Randle aspires. He leaves from New York. He goes to Minnesota. He knew that wasn't an option. He gets that, but in the same breath, that body language that you're talking about, the attitude, he wore it on his sleeve and it was hard to hide, and players noticed that. And so Minnesota was not hesitant to move beyond him, just like the Knicks were not hesitant to move beyond him. He's really going to have to look in the mirror and think about what kind of player he's willing to accept himself as, when he sees himself. In the end, though, it comes down to Minnesota in this regard. You've got a superstar in Anthony Edwards. He is a superstar, make no mistake about it. And he can't be happy with what the organization is doing. No, he's not upset. You want to keep him, and Jaden Daniels, he wants to keep him. Got that part. But what you going to do to upgrade? What you going to do to show Anthony Edwards that you can compete with San Antonio and you can compete with Oklahoma City? What are you going to do in that regard? That is a question he is looking for the organization to answer. And if they don't answer it sooner than later, with a piece or two here or there that they get, don't be surprised if he sits up there and says, yo, man, it's time for me to get up out of here.
$112 million deal. But this Randle trade, it feels like it might have a ripple effect, Vinny. Do you think this is good or bad for Anthony Edwards?
Let's see. That's all I got to say. Let's see. If I'm Anthony Edwards, I'm looking at that ownership, I'm looking at that front office, and I'm saying, you have watched Karl-Anthony Towns go and become a champion. You just traded Julius Randle for cap space. So in essence, you traded Karl-Anthony Towns for 2 second-round picks in cap space, or a trade exception, a $33 million trade exception. What you gonna do? They got $33 million so they can fill somebody in that spot. They had the mid-level exception at $15 million. You cannot keep expecting Anthony Edwards to drag these teams to deep in the playoffs when the West is getting better at the top. Maybe they're not getting better in the middle, Perk, but they're getting better at the top. OKC isn't going anywhere. San Antonio is not going anywhere. Who knows what happens with Houston, with LA, with Denver, with some of these other teams. But you cannot send Anthony Edwards into the playoffs, into a gunfight with butter knives. And that's essentially what it is.
The NBA is no longer whispering, it is warning. Because right now, the Minnesota Timberwolves are standing in a situation that feels less like progress and more like a countdown. A 22-year-old superstar in Anthony Edwards, box office, explosive, unstoppable, has become the face of everything Minnesota hopes to be.
But behind the highlight reels, behind the dunks, behind the confidence, there is a growing concern. If this franchise does not move fast, move smart, and move fearless, they may lose him. Not to injury, not to decline, but to frustration. And this isn't speculation pulled out of nowhere. League voices are already warning that watching other stars get support, get reinforcements, and get structure
while Edwards carries pressure at this level, is starting to create tension that cannot be ignored. Because talent like this doesn't wait forever. And Minnesota might be running out of time. And if you think this is only about one young star, you're about to see how one trade decision cracked everything wide open. The ripple effect started with one name: Julius Randle. A player with resume strength that cannot be ignored. We are talking about a guy who has averaged at least 20 points per game in 5 of the last 6 seasons. A 3-time All-Star, a 2-time All-NBA selection, and in his best recent stretch, a dominant 25 points and 5 rebounds per game type of presence. This is not a role player. This is not a throw-in. This is a proven NBA force. And yet, Minnesota moved on. Critics call it a cap decision. Supporters call it flexibility. But inside the league, the interpretation is sharper. A franchise trying to reshape itself while still chasing contention just removed a major piece. And when Randle struggled in key moments, when his body language, inconsistency, and playoff questions resurfaced, the Wolves made their choice. But choices in the NBA always come with consequences. And this one is echoing louder than expected. But here's where it gets dangerous, because this wasn't just about Randle leaving. It's about what Minnesota already lost before him. Because in the background of every Timberwolves conversation, there is Karl-Anthony Towns, a franchise cornerstone who became a champion elsewhere while Minnesota was forced to reset. And now the uncomfortable question is hanging in the air. Did Minnesota already mismanage one superstar era only to risk repeating the same pattern with another? From the outside, it looks simple. Towns left, Randle arrived. Randle left, cap space arrived. But what does cap space mean without execution? Right now, Minnesota holds flexibility around a $33 million trade exception and access to a $15 million mid-level exception. On paper, that looks like opportunity. In reality, it looks like pressure. Because flexibility without impact is just waiting. And waiting in the Western Conference is dangerous. And while Minnesota debates numbers, the West is doing something far more terrifying. It is evolving without mercy. This is the part Minnesota cannot ignore. The Western Conference is not slowing down. It is accelerating. Oklahoma City is not going anywhere. San Antonio is rising faster than expected. Denver remains a proven machine. Houston is loading potential. And even the Lakers, unpredictable as always, are never truly out of the equation. This is not a friendly environment. This is a survival field. And in survival fields, stars either get support or they get overwhelmed. Anthony Edwards is already performing at a superstar level, but the expectation now is not development. It is domination. And domination without reinforcement turns into exhaustion. Because no matter how explosive Edwards is, no one wins in the West alone anymore. And that leads to the most uncomfortable truth of all. What happens when your superstar starts watching everything unfold from inside the building? Anthony Edwards is not just a player. He is the identity, the energy, the hope. But hope is fragile in the NBA when it is not matched with action. Because from Edwards' perspective, the question becomes simple. How long do I wait? He is on a $112 million deal. Yes, he is locked in contractually. But contracts do not stop frustration. Contracts do not stop ambition. And contracts do not stop the league from watching every emotional signal, every reaction, every quote, every silence. And when a superstar sees other franchises aggressively building around their stars, while his own team leans on flexibility instead of finality, that is where pressure starts to form. Not publicly, but internally. And that is where exits begin, not with announcements, but with thoughts. And if Minnesota thinks this is just noise, the front office math tells a very different story. This is where reality becomes unavoidable. Minnesota is not broke. Minnesota is not inactive. But Minnesota is at a crossroads defined by assets that must become results. Like a $33 million trade exception, a $15 million mid-level exception, flexibility that could reshape the roster immediately. But flexibility unused becomes pressure amplified. Because every season wasted in the Western Conference is a season closer to losing control of your star timeline. And Anthony Edwards is not a wait-and-see type of player anymore. He is entering the phase where expectations turn into urgency. An urgency in the NBA does not stay quiet for long. And now everything comes down to one final truth, one decision that defines the future of an entire franchise. This is the moment Minnesota cannot misread. You do not get infinite chances with a player like Anthony Edwards. He is not developing into a star. He is already one. The question is no longer potential. It is commitment. And if the Timberwolves do not convert flexibility into real roster strength, if they do not prove they can compete with Oklahoma City, San Antonio, Denver, then the narrative will shift from building around Edwards to losing Edwards. Because the NBA has seen this story before. A superstar rises. A franchise hesitates. And the league moves on. The warning signs are already here. Now comes the response.